Hello, everyone. I need to start this off with an apology. I was having some technical difficulties with recording the audio for the first 5 minutes or so of this meeting, and as a result, you missed out on Josh introducing some new parts of our FPVFC website where we're trying to make it super easy for everybody to look up their congressman who may be on transportation committees or different committees that are related to the FAA so that you can send out a letter to them telling them what we think about the remote ID. Anyway, so I'm going to jump you right into the middle of the conversation here where Josh is continuing to discuss the parts of the website that he's been working
on here, which would be like the
Subcommittee on Aviation and Space.
I've got those. It would be like the Defense and Homeland Security subcommittees. Those are going to be the other ones that are going to have the big influence on there. I just have to have a little bit of time to kind of put those there. So we wanted to present this. Now, one of the other things I'm going to do probably by the end of the night is provide a link to this letter in terms of like a Google document. So if you have suggestions, you have edits, ideas you want to toss in there that you think would be beneficial to everybody involved, you'll be able to kind of jump in there, suggest an edit, and then I can go through and get those added or detracted in there. So thoughts, comments, ideas, just right off the bat. So I'll catch up on a couple of these.
Go ahead.
I know you guys have good contacts with like a lot of YouTubers and people with sort of like an outsized voice. Have you thought about are you pushing this message to them as well so they can contact their viewers and be like, hey, if you live in this state, you need to get hold of
Absolutely.
this person.
Yeah. So definitely. So this has kind of been a soft launch on this thing, and we kind of held back for a while because we felt obviously that our legislative branch has kind of had their hands full over the last couple of months. So we've been kind of holding on to this and not really pushing it because we don't want the message to get lost in the mess essentially. So now that we're kind of coming out on the other side of it, and I think we're at 39 states at this point are starting to reopen by the end of this week. We wanted to get this posted so people can start reacting to it, start forming what they want to do, forming what they want to say to their members. Beyond that, yes, now that it's out, we can start pushing it on the influencer side, and obviously to anybody with some class. So this is kind of the next step, guys. So we had the comment period that was massively successful in terms of getting comments. We ended up with over 50,000 comments, probably one of the biggest NPRMs that has ever seen. Number two, we had the protest. We got that kind of pushed. People have been having, conversations. We're involved on the drone advisory committee, and then the next step here is contacting the people who kind of hold the purse strings, and these are the people whose jobs we directly affect in terms of our vote. So these are going to be the people that from a basis of being able to listen directly to the people, this is going to be the next best option here. So that doesn't mean we're going to back down on having conversations or anything like that with the FAA and continuing that outreach. Doesn't mean we're going to stop being involved in the DAC. But from this standpoint, it's reaching out and getting our message heard. So any other questions, comments, anything that we can kind of clarify?
Bruce is saying, why are we bothering with comments anyway? In as much as the RSS developer cohort for requirements, not the cohort, not the developers themselves, have been selected. Why do we think they'll listen to comments? We do think that that there is work going on with the FAA. They are, Josh is correct. This is the largest NPRM that the FAA has received. The normal number is closer to 5,000 comments, so we're a factor of 10 over, so that's good. And we are hearing things like a survey popped up, let's see, that would be yesterday, that we will look at, take it, see if it makes sense, and if it does, if it looks viable, we'll ask folks to go ahead and take the survey, and because it is for both commercial 107 as well as recreational users. We're going to take the view that we are not wasting our time. Our view is that we're trying to work from within. Certainly, if the FAA comes out and it's obvious that they were simply ignoring the entire rules process, that's why we're laying the groundwork with our congressional representatives, because we were trying to shine a light on this. And there are enough points of contact now in the FAA that we don't think that they are, it doesn't require sign. No, that's correct. The rules are done. So XJet is saying this doesn't require sign off by politicians, though, does it? The necessary legislation has already passed into law via the reapproval. Right. The 2018 FAA Reauthorization Act gave the FAA several very important authorities, one of which was to identify UAS as aircraft and to repeal 336, the model aircraft exemption. And so the FAA absolutely has the authority, but the congressional representatives that we are encouraging starting a campaign to talk to have oversight responsibility. And then in the next budget cycle, these representatives, in combination with the appropriation appropriation committees, have funding authority. So we do feel that it is appropriate to continue and to continue pushing, and that's why I'm spending my time working with and working on the Drone Advisory Committee, spending probably 10 to 15 hours a week right now on 2 tasking groups. I think we need a far more strategic and tactical response. Simple comments and lobbying are unlikely to succeed. I have the plan. Well, speak up, Bruce.
I don't know. I think if you can get constituents from the specific for the members of those subcommittees, if you can get their constituents talking to them on a consistent basis, I think you probably have better chances with that, with a more targeted approach.
Oh, without a doubt. And we're encouraging, if you are not a constituent of a representative, our recommendation is don't bother. Don't bother sending an email, because at least from the congressional side, our representatives should be looking back to their district. Theoretically, senators are supposed to be taking a country-wide view, but we all know that they are parochial back to their own states as well. It's time for a good cop, bad cop. Let's be used to get back here. All right.
So,
what I'm trying to say there is the procedures laid down in the legislation allow for this consultative process, but listening to the consultation is purely optional. And one thing that I think will work far better is if we have groups like the FPV Freedom Coalition, perhaps the AMA, the other representative bodies weighing in as good cop, but you need a bad cop. You need someone like me who's going to say, if your rules do not suit, they're going to be ignored. And putting the alternative proposal that if they don't come up with a set of rules and restrictions that are a good fit with the needs of the community, then they are basically going to be completely useless. So it then behoves them far better for them to work with the groups like FPV Freedom Coalition and AMA to come up with rules that will be acceptable. You guys can't play bad cop because you guys are out there promoting positively, but someone like me can come in and play bad cop. And I can say, if you don't follow the recommendations of these groups, then you have to deal with the alternative, which is a whole lot worse from your compliance perspective.
I absolutely agree. It would be a nightmare for the FAA to have massive non-compliance.
Yeah.
And we have certainly been espousing that point in our NPRM comments, as well as in every tasking group committee I'm on. I mean, that's when we talk about, well, how many UAS operators are we talking about? And across the United States, it's in excess of 1 million. And so draconian or overreaching regulations that are not going to result in significant compliance, you won't have achieved the integration, which is the mandate of the entire UAS integration office.
Yeah. So, one of the things that, has come up is this remote ID cohort. And I know a lot of us got the email, and a lot of us are like, oh, they're moving forward with the remote ID and so on and so forth. But, let me kind of backtrack a little bit. These companies, they're partnering with these companies to develop the kind of ideas behind the USSs or the UAS service suppliers. These are, from the NPRM, yes, these would be the people who are going to be managing the remote ID, or would be managing the remote ID. But let's backtrack to, some of the suggestions from both us and some of our partners that we kind of worked with, was that, there are some aspects of commercial, like large fleets, that should, kind of be rolled into the remote ID, whereas people like recreational should absolutely be outside of it. With the exception of, let's say you are a recreational person that's going to be flying, 10 miles out, that kind of thing. It might be a little bit of a different tune. So that's not to say that, now that they're moving forward with USSs, that they are, they've ignored us and all that kind of stuff. I don't want anybody to think that, but I do want you to be wary. I want you to understand that, these are people who are kind of deciding how these USSs should operate, what's going to be the, data and whatnot that they're seeking, and how they're going to manage that. Keep in mind, there's a lot of sensitive data floating around. So how they manage our, or I don't want to say our as recreational, but our as UAS pilots, how they manage that data is going to be a very sensitive topic. So, there's a lot of things involved with moving forward with the USS aspect of remote ID. Here's what I go ahead.
The announcement last week was the identification of 8 companies who will create requirements that will go into the development of applications. And so we all looked at that list and said, these are the likely RSS companies themselves. True. However, that's good speculation on our part. But what the FAA announced is this group of companies will be working on the requirements of applications. So as they would say in Texas, they're fixing to do something. But it's not been a commitment yet that these will be the companies. This is much like the UAS knowledge exam. We had a cohort meeting on the requirements of the administration of the exam on January 14, there were 12 of us that showed up in Washington, and we were the group providing requirements. Hint, hint, wink, wink. We might be the group also to be the administrators of the exam, but that's absolutely not a commitment. And it's a similar process that we're observing here with the our USSs here.
So, Bruce, to kind of answer your question, so the requirements of the hobby are being ignored. From a certain point of view, I would say that if the consensus comes down that recreational are not going to be participating in remote ID, then technically no. If we are going to be participating, then yes, you are correct,
Right.
and I would fully agree with you.
It's also, these are the companies that will be the USSs. So I don't think any recreational individual is going to be a part of the unmanned traffic management system. So these are large software and telecommunications companies by definition. So
Yeah,
that's who they
these are
went
the
to.
people that can develop the infrastructure,
Right.
whereas the AMA, the FPV-FC, anybody else from the recreational side isn't necessarily geared up for that kind of project. So, now, again, the other reason for congressional outreach, the reason that we put these lists together, as these committee members change, we can update this, and as future things kind of roll out, we can reach out to these folks on different aspects of our hobby, and the more that we start, developing that talking relationship with our Congress people, the better off we'll be. So somebody asked when the next FAA reauthorization. So the FAA reauthorization is good for 5 years.
Yep.
So 2023 would be the next one. And one of the things I don't think a lot of people understood was when the FAA reauthorization happened, nobody was talking to these people. There weren't a whole lot of people talking to Congress themselves saying, let's start working on some of this stuff. We start developing that relationship now. For 3 years from now, there's a much bigger impact that we as individuals would be able to have on that. And the more that we can speak with a unified message, the better off I think we'll all be. That's one of the ways we kind of attack the comment period, where we put out a message, we put it out to the community had input on it, we kind of crammed it all together, we made it so that kind of a lot of people's different voices were in it. It wasn't just me, it wasn't just Dave, it wasn't Dan, it was everybody that put some emphasis in there. We reached out, we got data, we got sources, from our partners, and through all that we were able to put together the response that we did. And beyond that, we were able to take that response, send it out to everybody, send it out to our members, send it out to our community, send it out to our partners. And as you go through those comments, and I'm not saying it was all just us, but a lot of people had the same kind of impression of what that message should be. And that's the way I think we as a recreational community need to be pushing our message forward. And again, it's not just about the FPVFC. If you subscribe to the AMA, if you FCTA, whatever outlet you go through, the more that we can be as a community speaking the same words, the better off we're going to be. And that's kind of the tack that we're taking going forward with this. And again, keep in mind that these are the people.
There's also a lot of infrastructure that needs to be designed for this to work. In the remote ID NPRM, as well as the two other NPRMs. One was an announcement of an NPRM that came out in early 2019, there was a fair amount of discussion about the UTM and the infrastructure that would be put forward. And so unmanned traffic management. So there's a document called ConOps 2 that references and is it is in itself a requirement statement for unmanned traffic management. And that is one of the two topics of the tasking group that I'm working on with the Drone Advisory Committee. It's pretty rough right now, rough in the sense of there's a lot of detail that needs to be added before this can be put into operation. And so if you envision that these 8 remote ID USS companies have to set up a federation of companies and federation of UTMs that will interact and feed data back and forth to a single FAA database. A lot of what are the data elements? How does this going to work? What's the security? How do you back data up? How do you make sure that when you log someone in, or if I travel from Albuquerque to Austin, Texas, how do I how can my national sign-on function? A lot of details to be worked. So we don't have a lot of things that are already done, which emphasizes this is a good time to get involved and get engaged. And so that's what we're trying to do. And as Bruce said here, he's absolutely right. We are working on the good cop side of things. We are not a shill for the FAA. We're absolutely being a loud voice for recreational and frequently for 107 pilots as well.
I mean, honestly, we want to be the elephant in the room. We're working with them, but we're the voice that can't be, overheard. So, and to answer, Bruce's other question, the USS environment ought to be a competitive one. I absolutely agree. But again, it comes down to being able to facilitate the infrastructure on this, and a lot of these companies are the ones that can kind of push that. There's no doubt that there's money to be made in here. We know from the remote ID and PRM that there's a potential for subscription fee, which means monetizing the airspace, which doesn't sit well with me. I don't think it sits well with any of us. Now, in terms of who can develop that infrastructure, I think that's going to be the basis on who's going to be able to compete in that environment. And I'm sure there's going to be other companies. And a lot of the times we've seen that the FAA has put out, incremental approach to adding people onto these projects. So, we see invitations go out for new DAC members. We see invitations go out for participation in the API for Lance. So those are kind of the parts where we see them do an incremental approach to adding other companies into the system. So
yeah, TextChat is saying that as a lifetime IT person, the whole RID concept seems daunting. Yeah, we tend to agree, and that's why we pushed for and continue to push for broadcast only. It's simpler. There's no cell phone fee or subscription. We think it would be a lot, and that would move the number of UAS that are possible to upgrade up to a reasonable number, up from 0, and certainly the FAA's estimate of 93% of the current UAS fleet could be software upgraded to be compliant. We felt that number was 0 because of the way the NPRM was written. Allow us to just do broadcast, and it could be at least half of the current UAS flying could be software upgraded to be compliant.
So pay to fly, there are 2 telephone companies involved on the current list. How will other telephone companies be disadvantaged? So I would imagine that there are 2 reasons that telephone companies want to be on that list. Number one is going to be for the data that's going to be passing through their systems. There's obviously a payment scheme. You have to pay for your data. The other secondary aspect to that would be facilitating the ability to utilize commercial grade drones to inspect their equipment.
Right.
In a metropolitan area like Phoenix, cell phone towers are everywhere. I don't even want to begin to count how many are just in my neighborhood. But the ability to send somebody out with a drone to inspect their equipment is far more palatable than sending a person up to inspect every one of those towers, every cycle, whatever their
Right.
cycle is.
Right.
So,
And these companies all the cell phone companies in the US are doing that now, which is,
yes.
this is why they participate in the drone advisory committee, because they want to say in how things are going. And, you know, yep.
And yes, you are correct. We are 90% of the remote pilots. But the one thing that we've kind of come across is, actually two things that we've kind of come across is number one, a lot of the companies and a lot of the FAA themselves aren't seeing recreational in the same tact that we are, in terms of how big we are, how often we're flying, that kind of thing. A lot of the things that we do see is that, a lot of the time they're surprised by what's going on, which is not a good place to start from. But on the flip side, I think a lot of the approach to these regulations tend to be geared towards the commercial industry, and we're kind of falling into that by proxy. So the whole point of a lot of the things we're trying to do is get recreational on the map, let them see what we're doing, let them understand why we need to be doing it, and get them to understand how big and how we are. Do regulators believe that drone delivery and other levels of commercial drone use? That's a question I can't answer at this time. I
Well,
don't know.
the FAA forecast of utilization, the answer is no. They have the compound annual growth rate of commercial, including delivery, is in the 30 to 40% per the FAA's estimates, and 6 to 7% compound annual growth rate for recreational. So we're starting at a much higher number and continuing a growth rate. And so, law of big numbers, a large number growing at even single digit, the commercial never catches recreational by the FAA's forecast of usage.
So, in terms of the viability of drone delivery, there are a couple people in here who, we have had those conversations. Drone delivery doesn't strike me as something that's going to just take off. I don't think it's efficient enough. In terms of other commercial uses, yeah, I do firmly believe, and you got to keep in mind that a lot of this is not just quads but fixed wing as well. So I know a lot of there's I want to say a couple companies here in Arizona. They do a lot of fixed wing flying over farmland. We have a lot of farmland over here, plus we're in the desert, so the proper utilization of water is a big deal. And I do know that there's a lot of I want to say next generation farmers that are using that kind of technology here. So that kind of stuff from the commercial side is pretty relevant. And our farmland can tend to be pretty spread out. So being able to fly beyond visual line of sight to inspect your fields, to get those infrared images back, it's from that aspect, yeah, it's absolutely it's a big kind of subsector. So do the manned aircraft flying in Class G space have to have network on? No, we know that's not a requirement, but
they have to have ADSB right now, I think. Yeah.
Not in Class
yeah,
G.
not in Class G though.
And
yes, we know that's an argument.
yeah, the coverage the coverage of ADS-B out in manned aircraft is approximately 50% right now, and of course that was ADS-B 2020. So that was the mandate after a 10-year period was to have all manned aircraft have ADS-B out installed. So that's about 50% right now.
Yeah.
I'd like to chime in when you have a
Absolutely. Jump
Yeah,
in.
please.
Okay, so I'm looking here at the list of the Senate Commerce Subcommittee on Aviation and Space, and at least 4 of these members that I count are up for Senate re-election as Class 2 senators in the next election coming up.
Yep.
So we may well see some changes in the makeup of that committee. So it may not be that people contacting their local senators is as wasted as we might see, because we don't really know who will be the next members of that committee. If we could preload those people before they even get a seat there, that may be more effective than trying to talk to them after the fact.
It's
You
not a
mean
bad idea.
contact some of the candidates who we think are
Yeah,
likely
keep
to.
a really close eye on potential members, and then maybe even carefully
Yeah,
target those people before they even get there.
yeah,
Absolutely.
not a
It's not a
bad
bad idea. Yep. That's a great thought, and definitely something I'm putting on my notes. Also, go
One
ahead.
more thing, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, you're fine.
I've noticed that we keep mentioning recreational people, and that's definitely a big thing. But I would think that our interests pretty heavily align with anyone who's not Amazon, Intel, etc. So I don't know that we need to confine our advocacy simply to recreational pilots. I think that if we reach out and really explain to people why this is their problem too, I think we'll find that there's a lot of other interest groups, which is essentially what we are, that have a tremendous sort of Venn diagram overlap with the things that we want.
Absolutely. And who we try to reach out to are anyone affiliated with Part 107. We do find that 135 or 91. So if you're doing cargo or delivery, not really interested in us and our
Putting it nicely.
yeah, and our objectives don't align. The drone advisory committee has allowed us to meet the people in the aviation manufacturers as well as the manned aviation associations who are keenly interested, and many of these people, no surprise, are also they fly models, so they are sympathetic, and given that we we're working on a collaborative approach, we sign up to do work and to help on these committees, so we are well received, and that's why they're helping us on tips and techniques on how and who to approach in Congress, as well as also they were open, and the AOPA, the EAA, even the ALPA comments to the NPRM were largely aligned with ours, and we shared documents prior to the submission, which was, I think, certainly helpful to us. And we know that a couple of the associations used our document to help as a primer to some of their people who are writing comments to the NPRM. So we do feel that working with folks, reaching out, and being inclusive. And so if someone shows up with us and they're like, well, I fly fixed wing RC, but I think this is important. You bet, because what we're working on is UAS, and I agree. It does span commercial, largely 107 or Part 107, as well as recreational. And 1/4 of the AMA members bother to submit NPRM, or apathy will be our downfall. Well, aren't you the picture of optimism, Bruce?
I mean, here's here's the deal. One of the things that unfortunately we can't control from our side is what the AMA is telling their folks. So again, I would say that several, I would say, like voting. A lot of the members of the AMA don't want to be bothered with the political side of this stuff, and again, it does come down to apathy. But at the same time, there are those who can't be bothered to drag themselves to the polls sometimes. So,
Right.
it's kind of like that. So, in
Yeah, I'm
terms
not.
of political sign off on lobbying politicians or contacting politicians, it's kind of multifold. Number one, as a regulatory organization, they are working through the mandate of Congress. So by contacting Congress, we can change that mandate. Is that likely? I don't know. Number two, they pull the purse strings on these regulatory bodies, so there's that aspect. Number three, we do not get to say who is in charge of a regulatory body in terms of we the people, but by making an impact through Congress, we can work through that as well. So, it's kind of this multifaceted approach on why we want to develop a relationship with our congressmen and women. So from that aspect, I do think it's worthwhile to start to build those relationships. One of the things that we as an organization have been very good at is building relationships with different partners in the space, whether that be AOPA or Drone U or any number of other organizations that we have kind of developed these relationships with through Dave's excellent work on the DAC or through our NPRM response or whatever. There are a lot of influencers on the company, corporation, collective side that we have been able to build those relationships. So again, kind of again going back to Einar's comment just now, the fact that there are more than 1 million registered recreational UAS and less than 20,000 or 200,000 paying members is evidence of it. A lot of people just can't be bothered. A lot of people don't know. A lot of people are just not doing things the way that the FAA is mandating because there's not a ton of information. When you first get into this hobby, if somebody didn't say, "Hey, you need to go register," I probably wouldn't have known. Because I was just a guy flying his drone. But through information, YouTube and reading and all that kind of stuff, I learned, oh hey, if I'm gonna go fly this, government wants me to register. So
Well, it's that the AMA does not do anything about the fact that a lot of their clubs say no FPV, no multi-rotors. You're just not allowed to fly here.
true
They're
story.
just letting it happen. That's
And
huge.
I will not refute that. And that's why when we created the FPVFC, we felt that the FPV community, the drone community, was severely underrepresented by an organization like the AMA, and which provided a space for us to be able to come in and say, hey, let's all kind of gather up and let's have a voice and let's start to shape this stuff. And unfortunately, could it have been a year or two earlier that it would have been better off? Absolutely. We literally started this in the middle of the reauthorization, and right as we were kind of not even coming out of the birth canal, it dropped. And so we kind of came in it in an awkward position without being able to affect a lot of the things that have shaped what's happened since. But at the same time, going forward, we can kind of work towards shaping that process. And
Yeah, and we're connecting with three of the executives in the AMA. One is Tyler Dobbs. He's the director of governmental affairs. The other is Rich Hansen. He's the president of the AMA and he's a DAC member. And the third is Chad Boudreau, the executive director of the AMA, and he's also working with us on a couple of these DAC tasking groups. And I'm also an AMA member and an officer of a local club where it's a small club, but the median age is north of 70 years old. And so I think the AMA is aging out. And one of the comments was that the AMA did themselves a disservice by cutting off FPV from their fields, at least tacitly. And their final 16-page submission to the NPRM was much more inclusive. And it was, if you talk to Rich Hansen or Chad Boudreau or Tyler Dobbs, they really want and need drones, UAS, to be part of the AMA. On the local club level, certainly I was a member of a larger club south of where I live, and they excluded first helicopters, and then of course, gosh forbid, drones fly at their field. But it comes down to a club by club. But certainly we hear, consistent with that, a lot of on the ground at the flying field level. If you show up with an FPV, you're not really terribly welcome. And so it's also not a lot of fun to fly a drone at an AMA flying field. So I'm flying model airplanes there. Too little, too late? I don't think so, because of the velocity with which the regulations within the FAA are moving. Jay Merkel comments that the UAS Integration Office is moving at a pace that is much, much faster than any other part of the FAA. For the AA, you mean for the AMA? Yes, I think they are pushing a little. I think they're going to age out quickly. The 200,000 number breaks down to 150,000 paid members and 50,000 of their park or junior non-paying members. So their numbers are dropping, and the FRIA could be, if that goes into effect, that could be the kiss of death. So I'm anxious for the AMA could be a great partner, and we try to work with them every day, and we are working with them on the DAC. We worked with Tyler on the exam input, as well as the NPRM. We shared our input with them. So again, it's to us better that we work positively and work as an advocate.
May I chime in here?
Please.
All right. So Cujo was saying, and I think that he's right, that a big issue is that there's just sort of like a giant blind spot. Has there been any thoughts put into doing a fundraising campaign and using that money to just straight up buy advertising, like buy a billboard figuratively in Times Square that says, "Do you own a Phantom drone? Well, the FAA wants to ground it by 2023. Go to, fpvfc.com or whatever." Have you guys thought about trying to, amplify your voice outside of your connections that you have?
Yes.
And not much success, I guess.
No, it's just formative.
Got you.
Working directly with manufacturers and retailers and distributors.
Yep. Beyond that, I would say, have we looked at renting a billboard in Times Square? No, we haven't. But on the flip side, one of the things that we have done is really push. We have a great marketing guy, David, who is helping us work through. One of the nice things about being a nonprofit is Google Ads gives us $10,000 a month to push that aspect, and David's doing a great job in terms of getting our name out there on search engines and that kind of thing. So we are working on that front. We are working with manufacturers and suppliers, in order to kind of build the bubble, I guess, and expand it out. So dropping leaflets over Times Square. We could do that right now. I think it would be just litter on the ground because nobody's there.
Yeah. Really.
So, so we are working several different aspects and kind of tacks to bring ourselves to the light. I'm working on a personal project that I feel could have an impact, but it's still in the formative stages. It's the more that we can get our name out there as a force for good, and by our name I mean recreational UAS, not FPVFC, but as a collective, as a force for good, and the things that we're doing, the innovation that we're creating, the STEM programs that we're inspiring, those are things that the public in general understand. But at the same time, I'm a little wary of how much the public will really even care one way or the other if you're not involved in the hobby. So do we need to enhance the way that we're viewed? Absolutely. Do I feel like John Q. Public, who is into cars or something and not into drones, is going to give a care? Probably not. But the bigger that we can expand our voice through both individual pilots and through companies and manufacturers and distributors and suppliers, the better off we're going to be. Let's see, trying to catch up on everybody's comments while I went on my diatribe there.
Yeah, we're talking sub 250. And our view on sub 250, sub 250 for recreational is exempt of remote ID. We were loud and clear in our comments that we would like that continued. It would be terribly easy to just strike sub 250 because certain DHS wants all drones to be visible. So it would not surprise us that there are modifications to the sub 250 as we move toward the final rule. Yes, and sub 250 is only for recreational and not for 107. If you fly 107, you have to register, and once you register, register the aircraft, not the operator. You are subject to the proposed remote ID rules. Yes, we understand Canada's doing a good job. It's pretty surprising, in as much as Canada started out with a very restrictive set of
draconian setup.
Yeah, unbelievable rules, and then their sub 250, they're doing great.
Yeah.
So we just need to make lighter aircraft. Our view is that sub 250 is great, is cool. But we do not want to change. Yeah, we don't want to change our approach from where we were on the NPRM, because we think that there is still a lot of vitality in the 5-inch, 7-inch, and a lot of innovation can happen there. And certainly, sub 250 makes it more difficult because you have to be miniaturized before you can get the thing in the air.
Yeah. I don't feel like we should, I'm not at the point yet where I'm compromising. I don't want to give up one to gain the other. And, that's just my personal opinion. I think that as we stand right now, we've kind of, we're kind of bumping up against the wall in terms of innovation of a sub 250. Flight characteristics are obviously different. The amount of equipment you can pack on a sub 250 is limited. For a lot of the things that we want to use a drone for, sub 250 doesn't quite always hit it. It comes close. It definitely comes close, but it's not there yet. But as we kind of rub up against that wall of innovation and miniaturization issues and whatnot, we're kind of bumping up against the wall there. So, all right. anything else we want to touch base on? Any more comments? Any more questions that we can answer? This has been a really good meeting, and I really appreciate the feedback, guys. Definitely gives us some food for thought, and hopefully this was informative for everybody else as well. What is one thing that everyone should do this week to improve the hobby? That's a great question. I think one of the biggest things I could say, and one of the biggest things that I do, is I just talk about it. I'm constantly sharing videos with people who have no idea. I work in the retail industry, so I've run into customers who, maybe they flew fixed wing model aircraft, a decade ago, had no idea, have fallen out of it, have no idea about drones. I talk to them about it. I'm able to bring that expertise with electronics into, talking with people about projects and what they're working on, and being able to do that. I do like Dan's comment, don't hurt anyone. And don't,
Yeah, and,
yes, absolutely, don't take that
I'm,
man.
Ina has a good one. Find someone flying in an unsafe manner and
And
talk to
talk to
them.
them. Yep.
This is getting a lot of discussion in the in the tasking group I'm working on safety culture, and so I'm understanding in manned aviation, if you're a pilot and you see a fellow pilot do something that's it's not reckless and it wasn't intentional, but it was unsafe, you walk over and chat with them and you say, hey, saw that maybe you could do that a little better, and it's a philosophy that has gained traction where there is a non-punitive self-reporting to the FAA, and that's, to me, very positive. So the idea of helping each other out, NERC does a great job of this. He had a video a couple of weeks ago where he said, hey, you want to be a little more safe when you travel on an airplane? Set your, discharge your batteries to storage level, and let me show you what the reduction in the total amount of energy is in these things. And I thought, wow, that's fantastic. I mean, that's the essence of what we're trying to push, which is, do better than the minimum requirement. Be safe and be smart.
Absolutely. So we got a couple other suggestions. I like Einar's. Find someone flying unsafely and talk to them. The other big thing I would say is don't beat them up. Just have that nice constructive criticism conversation. Don't blow them up on Facebook. Why are you doing this? And I saw something like that the other day, and I was just like, guys, just have that, pull them aside. It doesn't need to be a public forum. Just have that quick conversation. Lenny's, I like Lenny's. Be super patient with noobs.
Really.
One of the reasons I got into drones was the community, more so than the aspect of flying. I felt like at the time that I was getting into it, I felt like the community was very helpful. Again, I grew up on
supportive, inclusive.
Yep, absolutely. I came into the hobby on not to flatter Bruce, but on Bruce's videos on RC model reviews, on flight tests, and I would literally, watch and listen to those things religiously, and get on Facebook and figure out what was going on, and find out, the scene in my area in Phoenix was just in its founding stages then, and those are kind of when I came in, and the attitude was very welcoming. I think that tone has shifted a little bit, and I'd like to see us move back towards that welcoming tone. So,
and Alex Suarez asks, can more of us help with the DAC tasking groups? And the answer to that is yes. We got permission, and the permission is exactly the right word, because the information that we create is embargoed until it's presented to the FAA at the day of the DAC. So we got permission to send out a survey on the safety tasking group, and I'm going to try to make this the norm now that we have a precedent. And so I'm driving brief Facebook polls, and so I will reach out to folks on FPVFC Facebook group to push them out to the extent you can, and that would be of significant help. I'm also these will, yeah. Other than that, I'll think about how how else can we get folks involved, and certainly it's usually, to echo what Josh was saying, is that when I describe what how people contact, what the communities are, that they we really are talking to people around the world. Evidence of that can be very useful, and so a good question, and that's one part. And I'll try to think of more ways that we can ask for help across FPVFC on the tasking groups. Don't worry, I'll save the hobby now. Okay.
Love it. All right, guys, I won't take up much more of your evening. I do appreciate you guys being here, and I appreciate the feedback. It's great to hear from everybody, and we do appreciate it. I hope you guys all have a great evening. I hope you all are safe and healthy, and let's keep it that way. And hopefully you guys can get out and fly. It's hot as blazes in Phoenix right now, so indoors it is for me.
All right, take care. Be safe, everyone.
Take it easy, guys.
Thank you.